Hello. Wow. Hello. All right, good evening, everyone. I want to first thank the Sheen Center for allowing me to come speak with you and to share my passion in life. I want to thank them because today, of course, is the first day of Black History Month. And so it's great to be able to tell these stories, but I also hope that one day, and I long for this day, that our stories, African American or Black stories, are not just recognized on this particular month, but year round, right? But someone once said, we all know how beautiful a well-made clock can be. When each gear is functioning properly, it works as a viable unit, ticking away the minutes and the hours with a proud precision. The African American community, the white community, and our unity as a human race is rather like that clock. Composed of many parts, this theater, the Scene Center, and our country run on the functioning of the many units of which it is composed. And like that clock, when all these units are working well together, it's truly a joy to behold. Now, many feel that the job of our public figures is to look after these gears of our clock and see the functioning of its units. As citizens, activists, and filmmakers, many of us do our part to contribute to this working clock. As citizens, many of us are perplexed by many actions that are taken in various situations. Many hear about social problems and do nothing. Many talk, and there's others like myself, just have to act, driven by inner spiritual force. I come to you in the spirit of the late Mamie Till Mobley and the legacy of her son, Emmett Lewis Till, asking you to help keep the fire of this movement burning and to also continue to keep our eyes on the prize until justice and closure finally prevails in this particular case. Although I'm truly overwhelmed by the accolades I've received over the years, one must still remember that we're still far from the courtrooms and far from stopping the injustices that continue to plague our communities abroad. Now that I have your undivided attention, I must take this moment to embrace two persons that we hold in high regard, persons that we have all come to love and respect. I speak of Dr. Martin Luther King, one who believed that the racial issue that we confront in America today is not a sectional, but a national problem. One who believed that the strange prejudices towards blacks are tightly wrapped around the American character. One who fought long and hard for equal opportunity for all people. And then there was Sister Rosa Parks, a seamstress who apparently got so tired that one day she refused to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was said because of this refusal, the American Civil Rights Movement then mobilized into position. Well, I would never talk bad about Sister Rosa Parks or my brother, Dr. Martin Luther King. But one must remember that before there was a Dr. King and before there was a Rosa Parks, there was the murder of Emmett Lewis Till that sparked the black resistance of the South, better known to us all as the American Civil Rights Movement. It's because of Till's death being foremost in Sister Parks' mind that she refused to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was because of Till's death that led a 26-year-old Dr. Martin Luther King to take on the Montgomery bus boycott. But no matter how you look at the beginnings of this movement, there's one thing that cannot be debated. The murder of Emmett Lewis Till woke the sleeping giant of black people across this globe. And of course, the movement, in my opinion, was then destined to happen. The year was 1955. The day was August 28th. The place was the Delta of Money, Mississippi, a case that has shocked and haunted a nation for more than 6 decades, a case that is still unresolved. The untold story, the murder of Emmett Lewis Till. A child who begged his mother, the late Mamie Till Mobley, to let him go down to the Deep South to visit relatives. A vacation that is not only remembered by his family, but of course, the whole world. Little did Mrs. Mobley think in a week's time her son Emmett, her only child, would be abducted from his great-uncle's home and tortured for one of the oldest taboos of the South, addressing a white woman in public. 2 men, Roy Bryant and J.W. Marlowe, would later confess to the murder of Emmett Lewis Till to a reporter by the name of William Bradford Hewitt. Of course, this sent shockwaves across the globe, and many felt it would cause a change, unfortunately, that we're still currently fighting for. You're probably asking yourselves, why now? Why Emmett Till now? Where terrorism hits us all in here this evening. For hundreds of years, my ancestors actually have been terrorized. And of course, terrorism existed before September 11th. And unfortunately, it probably exists, and as we know it, it's continuing to exist today. Why is this case so important? Like Reverend Jesse Jackson would even say, with no sense of history, we only live in a vacuum. How can you respect boxer Mike Tyson without understanding Joe Louis? How can you respect gospel singer Yolanda Adams without knowing that she stands on the shoulders of people like Mahalia Jackson? You see, it's important that we learn the truth surrounding this murder, for if we forget our past, history will repeat itself. Why is it that we still live in a world where dragging a man to death like James Byrd isn't good enough, but you would want to desecrate his grave to prove a point? Why do we still continue to see strange fruit hang across the country abroad? Again, it is important to understand these stories so we won't repeat the past. This evening, I have the honor of sharing you, as I said earlier, sharing with you my passion. And I hope after you see this film, it will inspire us all to leave here this evening and become involved in the in the movement that still exists in this country. And that's that movement of civil rights and human rights, of course. And before I walk away, I want to leave you with some words because I want this night to be very meaningful. One of our great leaders, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, once stated that no people are truly free until they become the instrument of their own liberation. Freedom is not to be bequeathed from one generation to the next. Each generation must take and maintain its freedom with its own hands. I firmly believe that. I sleep with that quote every night when I lay my head down to sleep. So again, I hope after we see this film and we participate in this nice discussion that we're going to have, that you walk away inspired and refreshed to get back in the game again. Thank you so much.
Emmett was the happiest baby in the world.
Emmett was mischievous.
We had fun together. We laughed together.
He had no sense of danger. Everything was funny to him.
They always kind of prep you for going to Mississippi. And I don't know if Emmett was told or not.
Mrs. Bryant came out of the store. That's when Emmett whistled at her.
Yes, he whistled at Carolyn Bryant when she came out of the store.
Sunday morning, about 2:30, there was a man with a pistol, and he said, "I want the boy from Chicago."
I knew they weren't gonna bring him back.
It was a terrifying experience.
The sheriff told me they had found the body.
One of the most barbaric atrocities committed against a child in the history of mankind.
Oh my God. Oh yes, we're gonna open the casket. Let the people see what I've seen.
We never have any trouble until some of our southern go up north, and the NAACP talks to them, and they come back home.
Oh, yeah. He stood up, pointed his finger, said, "That's him."
God is watching. Not guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Emmett was the catalyst that started the civil rights movement.
If it can further the cause of freedom, then I will say that he died a hero.
He is watching. She made America deal with its ugly racial problem.
He whistled at a white woman and ended up dead at the bottom of a river. Now, nearly 50 years later, a film called The Untold Story of Emmett Lewis Till helped reopen his case.
We owe it to Emmett Till.
God is watching.
We owe it to his mother. We owe it to ourselves.
Thank you all so much for being here, for being in this moment, for witnessing this story. Keith, I've seen this documentary, I can't even tell you how many times now, and it shakes me every single time. But this is the first time that I've seen it after becoming a mother and being a black woman, being a black mother to black children. I cannot even begin to imagine where Mamie Till Mobley got her strength from. I had a script, but I'm just gonna go off script, okay? Because as I was watching this again, one thing that struck me, you know, and we're talking about the power of storytelling and, you know, this project that you and Fred are going to be working on to turn this story into a feature. And as I was watching the documentary this time, the moment when they're describing how the verdict came down, I felt this chill. I was just suddenly terrified because it felt like the same time when the Trayvon Martin verdict came down. And I remember where I was, and I remember how it felt, and it was, and so I just want to start this talk back by just saying, you know, I know that you were very close to Mamie Till, and you've told me before how she said to you, Keith, you know, tell Emmett's story until it raises man's consciousness, and I asked you, so why are we still telling this story? Why is it still not enough? And I'm just going to start there. I'll let you go there. And
well, I think you actually touched on it a little bit when you mentioned Trayvon Martin. You know, I'm 46 years old now. And when I did this film, I was very young. I was, you know, research started when I was 22. Took me 9 years to produce the film. So I was very young, and this is my first film that I actually produced, and that was 15 films ago. I say this because I'm truly moved and amazed that in what I would consider my young years of life, that I'm actually seeing history repeat itself. And let me get into a little bit more in an explanation of that. Every time we see the shooting of unarmed black men by police, we think of Emmett Till. Emmett Till's name always metaphorically comes back into fruition. It's truly amazing because sitting down and hearing mother after mother talking about the loss of their child, I see Mamie. You open up and you said briefly, partial of a quote that Mamie used to always tell me. She used to say to me all the time through this journey, Keith, you must continue to tell Emmett's story until man's consciousness is risen. Only then there will be justice for Emmett Till. It's amazing to think about that because she was a prophet, and, to me, and in many ways. She foresaw everything that we are dealing with now. But she also understood that just like Emmett's case was a catalyst for change in 1955, it will be a catalyst for change today. And I think this is why this film is so important, because I don't look at this project and this film and even the movie that we're doing as a movie. I look at it as a movement, because people are now seeing before their eyes the same history that you saw in Emmett Till's day. It is a mirror image to all that we're dealing with right now at this point in time. There's no other story that speaks to this generation than the story of Emmett Lewis Till. And so it's heartbreaking to hear these mothers continue to struggle to get justice for their loved ones. But I have to say, it's more important to know this story more than ever. Mamie had the blueprint to our liberation. She really had the blueprint to our liberation. If we could argue that the civil rights movement was the greatest movement ever created in American history, which had an impact on the world, then arguably the Till case is a very important case to know. We run around, we have Black Lives Matter and all these different movements, but we wonder why it hasn't reached to its, to greatness like the civil rights movement did. And I know some of us may have our opinions about the civil rights movement and so on. But I want to talk about a successful movement for change. There's no other movement for change that has happened in the history of this country that has done greater things than the civil rights movement. But again, I don't think, when we hear the story of Emmett Till, what frustrates me the most, and I had to grow in this, this has been my life for over, since I was 10 years old, but for over 20 years, just steady talking about Till. Only until now I realized what Mamie was trying to tell me the whole time on my journey. And now I realize the importance of this story. And I think as we sit down, we look at this film again and again and again, we have to understand how organized Mamie and the NAACP and all these different other organizations that you saw in the film, how organized they were. Right now, we act as individuals, and when we see these cases, a lot of us act as individuals, individual activism, right? NAACP is doing one thing, National Urban League doing another thing, Black Lives Matter is doing their own thing. Everybody's scattered. With the case of Emmett Till, everyone was together. And that's why it had a profound impact. And I can go into more. This is like therapy for me, but I want to stop. I don't want to take over this time, but I can't reiterate more the importance of Emmett Till's case right now. Young black males that we're seeing are the Emmett Tills today. Those are being shot on the street. Those families that still struggling, trying to get justice. Emmett Till is the Anne Frank of Black America. And we really have to put that in context.
Thank you for that, Keith. I'd love to actually ask you, Fred, just with your platform as of what you've done in the film world, and I know I've told you before that I grew up watching Ghost of Mississippi and Mississippi Burnings, and I used to watch it with my father, and my father, and I just wanted you to speak a little bit to, why you think it's important to make this film now, and how actually you got involved with Keith and the story of Emmett Till, where that all started for you.
I wish we've already made it. It's 60, what, Keith? 60 some odd years, and still there's never been a film about this case. And it's kind of shocking, actually. A lot of stupid movies get made, and this hasn't been made. And so in a way, we should have, I blame myself more than anyone, we should have made this movie 10 years ago when we first started talking about making it. Because it's this film that did something remarkable. Keith got the United States government, it was the Bush administration, by the way, to reopen the Emmett Till case, which is as open and shut case as ever existed. We know killed him. Those two guys, they admitted it. They got paid 40 pieces of silver, $4,000. I think Milam got most of the money, if I'm not mistaken. And so what's the point? They did it. They got away with it. But that's not what actually happened. What actually happened is a more tragic and a more compelling story. And Keith, by telling the story in this film, got the United States government to act, which means that you can make a movie and someone will care when you make a movie. And that's what, I made a bunch of movies. I wish some of them were better than they are. I'd like to go back and fix some of them, but you're trying to do your best at the time to tell a story that will actually, we're sitting here, we're probably a couple of miles from Staten Island, where the father of several children was suffocated to death by police while emergency personnel watched. No one was indicted. It's not Mississippi in 1955, it's New York in the 21st century. No one did anything. The DA on the case was rewarded with a seat in Congress, and this is in the state of New York, the state that Hillary Clinton used to represent. And I wonder, well, how's that possible? Not possible. Mr. Garner wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't even selling cigarettes, which is a capital offense, I guess, in Staten Island. So I'm saying that, this story should compel us to ask those questions of how is it possible that a 12-year-old boy in Cleveland is shot within 7 seconds of the arrival of a police officer, and then described as a 20-year-old black man. And when his sister comes he's still alive, of course, left there on the ground. His sister comes to try to help him, and they beat on her. And no one's paid the price. And this isn't in Mississippi. I know it's easy to blame Mississippi, but they indicted those two guys, and they brought them to trial. Now, yes, they acquitted them. What else would you expect? But I'd welcome a trial in Staten Island or in the city of New York, wouldn't you? I'd like them to ask the question of how this man can be suffocated to death, and according to witnesses, took 11 minutes to die, and nothing's done. And so this film caused people to rethink this case and what it meant for America. And we just have to do it again, I think. And when we make our version, which Keith has co-written a brilliant screenplay with Michael Riley, I think who's actually here tonight. The two of them have actually spent now years trying to find a way to tell this story in the way that Keith brilliantly did here, that will make us both angry and committed. And in the end, that's why we really do this. And it somehow, we have to, I think as Mencken once said, we have to comfort the afflicted and we have to afflict the comfortable. And what Keith did here was afflict the comfortable. It was too easy to say, oh, let's not talk about that anymore. But we have to talk about these things and see them. And so I think we're incredibly fortunate. You know, I think I've seen this movie 10 times, and I said to Keith, oh, well, I don't know, I'll go, I'm gonna go to the bar and have a drink, you know, I've seen the movie. But then I sat there and I thought, well, I think I'll watch 10 minutes of it. And then I'm just sitting there, and I want to climb into the screen, and I want to, you know, I don't want to commit acts of violence against Bryant and Milam, but when they're kissing after it, it's just so, and fondling their children. As Whoopi Goldberg, who's working on the movie with us, said, she said, and I'll shut up after this, but she says, why do I want to do this movie? She says, well, how can a woman with children sit in the car, and when they bring Emmett out, she says, that's the one, knowing what they're going to do. How can a woman with children kill another mother's child? And for her, that's the question of this story. How could that woman, Carolyn Bryant, allow this to happen to another woman's child? What did he do? He whistled at her? Anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also rage-inducing, and I think that particularly before I became a mother, I was all just about the, you know, it's like, no, let the anger drive you, and then at some point, I said, well, I need this to be productive. I need these feelings to be productive so that I can help move things forward. And what can we do every day, just on a daily basis, to help move things forward, to provide a sense of hope, a sense that, you know,
Well, I think you and Fred tapped in on something. We have to be angry. It's okay to be angry, right? With anger, you get action. And when I produced this film, I wanted to have the same impact. I wanted to have the same impact on other people that it had on me when I first saw that photograph at the age of 10 in Jet magazine. I was shocked, I was angry and upset. And that's what prompted me on this journey for so long to tell this story. Until you get angry, we've been getting a little angry, but we're not there yet. Until we really get angry, then you're gonna start seeing things change.
Well, I have to add that it can't be just us getting angry. Everyone needs to be angry.
No, everybody, of course.
And we talk about this, that, the story of Emmett Till, it's like, it's an American story.
Yes,
it's
it is.
Not, it's everybody's story, that story belongs. And
absolutely.
So many times it's like, no, this is a part of Black history. No,
well, I think now we're intelligent enough to know that this story transcends race, and I just think we need to really understand those courageous decisions that the late Mamie Till Mobley made, having an open casket funeral. We need to understand the organization of how she actually pushed the Till case on not just America's consciousness, because this was an international story. This story actually started the media revolution in this country. It was was one of the rare times that you ever saw cameras in the courtroom. It was the first trial of the century. So I hear people talk about O.J. Simpson's case. You hear the trial of the century? No. Emmett Till was the first. And I'm saying all this because we really have to understand the story and the activism behind it. You had so many great leaders involved. This is the precursor to their greatness. People like Medgar Evers, Ruby Hurley, Amzie Moore, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, all these sheroes and heroes of that day. And, you know, Mamie, even when we were together, when she was with me along the way, she told me, she said, Keith, you have to really understand the story, but not only that, you must use the same tactics that I used back in 1955 to get the case reopened. So the case, it wasn't a coincidence that we got it reopened. We actually planned it. She said, one, you must first have the evidence. We didn't talk about the evidence yet, but I hope we really talk about it after we do our little commenting up here. But she said, you must have the evidence. Not only the evidence, you must have the people behind you because the evidence won't stand by itself. And you have to have the media behind you. So when I moved here to New York City and decided to tackle this film, it was the perfect storm for me. I could not have had the same evidence and the same film if I was in Louisiana. It wouldn't have worked. I kicked it off here in New York City because it was the media capital of the world. And I knew that when they talked about me here, it was going to go worldwide. And eventually that's what happened. That was the tactics of the late Mamie Till Mobley. That was her brilliance, instilling those things in me and explaining to me why it has to be here and why it can't be there and, you know, how I have to handle the evidence. It's, you know, we really understood how to really get this case reopened. And she knew it was going to be reopened before she passed away. And that was the, you know, I guess that was one of the highlights of my life, knowing that she had an opportunity to watch all the raw footage and everything I discovered, I went back to her with. So she knew what happened to her son before she passed away, exactly what happened to her son.
Yeah, we could talk about this forever.
Yeah,
there is so much here, but that's why the movie's getting made.
Look at this movement that's going on now. Finally, the abuse of women is not acceptable. Now, I'd love to see one of these guys go to jail. You know, jail's not the worst thing in the world. I spent a couple of days here or there in my life in jail. Jail is not the worst thing in the world. Harvey Weinstein should be in jail. Why is he not in jail? Oh, I think because we have a DA here in New York who didn't want to prosecute him because, as it turned out, he got some money from him, right? How does this happen right in front of us? It's not Mississippi now, I know, where all the evil happens. But jail's not the worst thing in the world. But there is this movement where very famous and powerful people are at least losing their job. Charlie Rose? I mean, Charlie Rose. It's like these people are losing. So there is this, I don't know, this wind in the country. It is blowing somewhere. And so it might lift up all sails, including black boys and black men and the injustice that goes on. Because it is a lot more horrific. I mean, these are terrible creatures from the deep. These are monsters, these racists. But police officers trained to protect, and they still can't, some can't stop pulling that trigger. I mean, they see a 12-year-old black boy and they want to shoot him. I mean, not say, hey, what are you doing over there? Is that a toy gun? They want to shoot him? By the way, in a state where you're allowed to carry a gun? So it's somehow, maybe this new movement, which is exciting, may lift up all movements. I think Mrs. Mobley would be a part of that, don't you think?
Thank you for that.
Yes.
I actually want to give us some time for the audience to ask you questions.
Just a quick comment about the words that you shared with us a few minutes ago when you talked about the children of the murderers and how their families interacted. Look at postcards that were taken of lynchings. Going back during Jim Crow. That was all part of the social fabric. And it's just horrific to see little kids with ice cream cones watching some man's life disappear at the end of a rope. My question or my point, I seem to remember, I'm not sure if I'm correct on this, that the woman who was allegedly attacked just before she died came across and said it didn't happen or something like that. Is that true? And if it is true, is that something that should be incorporated into the movie?
Well, first off, I want to make it clear, because I don't know how this rumor started that Carolyn Bryant is dead. She's still with us.
No, she's very much alive.
She's very much alive.
Which is great. You know why? Because we're going to put her in jail.
Well, one will hope, right? But
I hope she lives to be 100.
But no, Carolyn Bryant Dunham is still alive in North Carolina. Tim Tyson came out with a book in January of last year called The Blood of Emmett Till, and he interviewed Carolyn Bryant. And she basically made an admission that she fabricated the story. Now, I'm glad that question was asked, because a lot of people are getting confused by what was said and what did she fabricate, the story she fabricated. What we do know for sure is that Emmett did whistle. He did commit that act. In the courtroom in 1955, Carolyn Bryant stood up and gave a testimony to what transpired in the courtroom. She used a defense attorney, and they went to the middle of the courtroom, and they all acted out this scene. They both acted out this scene of what transpired in the store. So Carolyn basically said that Emmett grabbed her around the waist, cornered her behind a petition at the store, and said he'd been with white women before, there's no need to be afraid, and so on. And of course, this is what was said in the courtroom, and of course, many believed it. Now, when Tim Tyson got this admission, of course, it was 10 years after the initial investigation, because the investigation kicked off in 2004, right after, of course, the case reopened. And during that investigation, the first thing I gave the federal authorities was, one, a warrant they had out on Carolyn Bryant's arrest in 1955, which she was never served. And the other argument was that she committed perjury in the court of law. But unfortunately, perjury only held 2-year statute of limitations. So we were looking to get Carolyn Bryant on culpable negligence charges. In layman terms, that means that Carolyn Bryant understood the danger Emmett Till would be in and did nothing to stop it. And how do we know that? Well, some of the evidence that I have not put in this film that was part of the investigation was that I found 2 kids who were picked up before Emmett Till. And Carolyn Bryant was there to identify the 2 kids as not being Emmett. And so the question was, and the argument was always, who was at the house that night? Well, you heard Most Right talk about going towards, the men took Emmett towards the car, and there was a person at the car who identified Emmett as being the boy. Now, we all know that that was Carolyn Bryant. But the argument when it went to a grand jury in 2007 was that we could not prove that that person that was in the car was Carolyn Bryant, actually. But on the culpable negligence, you don't have to prove that. She didn't have to be present the whole time. She only had to understand the danger Emmett Till would be in and did nothing to stop it. And she understood that. And so now she is at the center of a review of the case again. I could say, case is over. Now, is America prepared? That's my question to you. Is America prepared to put an 82-year-old white woman in jail? You think? I thought we had her in 2007 when the grand jury came back, and unfortunately they said it was not enough evidence. So now she commits, or makes this admission that she fabricated a story, something we knew all the time. It was nothing new to us. It was new to a lot of folks who didn't know the story. But where do we stand right now? And that's the question that's lingering for me. Where's the love for Emmett Till? Where's the love for the young man who sparked the American Civil Rights Movement? We could go around the world and we could see Nazi criminals, 92, 93 years old, 100 years old, being taken and put in jail. But we're sitting here talking about Carolyn Bryant and making her the victim. And that's what's frustrating to me. And next to, of course, so many people that we've lost. Simeon Wright, we just buried my closest friend, buddy, connection to the Till case next to Mamie, Simeon Wright, last year. There's frustration there, you know. We should actually see some sort of closure and justice. We should see something. She should be brought to the court of law, and she should have her day there. Now, if they decide after she gave her testimony and, you know, that they don't want to indict her, charge her for anything or sentence her for anything, so be it. But we should hear from probably one of the last people on the planet who was present. We should hear that side of the story. And so my fight will continue on. I guess that's why Fred and I were perfect for each other. Fred inspired me with his films, and I felt that it would be important to team up and align myself with Fred because this was going to be my second opportunity to get Carolyn Bryant. And so I'm happy we'll be able to do it.
We've actually done it, though. Michael and Keith know this, that murderers of Goodman, Shorter, and Cheney. One just finally died, Preacher Killen. Preacher Killen went to jail because of Mississippi burning. Byron De La Beckwith, who shot Medgar Evers in the back in front of his children, and Murley, and they held him and begged for him to stay alive as he bled to death on his driveway. So this man shot him in the back. And it was because of evidence that emerged through a libel and slander trial brought against us by the sheriff of Neshoba County, Larry Rainey, who had been fired from his night watchman job by his employer, who happened to now be a black man. So he sued us for $6 million. And when we started calling him the $6 million man, he raised the ante to $8 million. And in that trial, evidence came out that Beckwith had told Larry Rainey that he killed Medgar Evers. And this was new evidence and allowed the Hinds County prosecutor to go to Tennessee, Signal Mountain, Tennessee, and get Beckwith and retry him for the third time. And he was convicted, and he went away. So it is possible. Now, whether they go to jail or an old folks home or they have to watch Seinfeld reruns for 24 hours, at least they have to stand up and apologize. Because Rwanda is an incredible, I think, sent us an incredible message. You're going to prosecute 1 million murderers? But for a murderer to honestly face his or her victims and say, I am sorry, I took the life of your wife, your husband, your child. That's something in that act is powerful. And for Carolyn Bryant, who tried to do it recently, in an interview she gave 11 years ago to a guy who was trying to make money out of Emmett Till. Keith, that's what this guy was trying to do. Held the interview for 11 years instead of giving it to the authorities. He deserves a couple of days in jail, don't you think?
Well, we will see. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I think we can do, maybe right here.
Recently had the opportunity to visit the Whitney Plantation, which if you don't know, it's a plantation really close to New Orleans that really delves into the history of slavery from both the male and female African-American perspective, but really delves into the history of it from the female's perspective. But there's this concept that the civil rights era and slavery was, the civil rights legislation was so long ago and we should just get over it. And one of the things that was introduced was the attitude that, you know, people don't necessarily participate or understand why African Americans are still talking about slavery and still talking about the civil rights era, and the fact that we really haven't advanced that far despite the fact that 60+ years have happened. And my question is, how do we become better at defining what it is? Because even in my mindset, I'm a librarian and an archivist, and I think a lot about words and getting messages across. Even I have a problem defining what it is, even though I am a Black woman and I have a Black nephew, and I have researched a lot about the African American struggles in America. So if you can help give some pointers on how we can define what is to people who are active, but also people who are inactive because it doesn't have a direct effect on their lives. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting that you made that comment, because a lot of us, as I said earlier, we live in this individual world. And it brings me back, and I'm thinking at the same time what things that Mamie used to say to me. There's a quote, and I know I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, that you probably read that Mamie said. She said, 2 years ago, I had an apartment and a child, and I used to hear about things that happened in Mississippi to Blacks, and I just ignored it and said, okay, that's their problem. And when it happened to her, she said, now it's everybody's problem. And I think we're getting there. I don't think there's something that we have to search for to inspire us to become active to what's happening today. I think, unfortunately, with the president that we have in office, it is hitting us at home. Again, what we saw or what we see happening today is no different from what we saw in 1955 with the White Citizens Councils. And so I think as this reality continues to hit you, and it's unfortunate because with technology and all these different things, we become desensitized to what we're seeing. But I have hope that as we continue to fight this good fight and see these ills continuing to happen, we're gonna truly wake up. But we have to be organized, and that's my only concern. Are we organized? Are we organized as Mamie was back in 1955? I mean, you gotta think about it. The Till case happened off the heels of Brown versus Board of Education. NAACP was a force to be reckoned with. It's not the same NAACP that we see today. Nowhere near it. The NAACP had a history of throwing lawsuits at people, boycotting whole states, their products, all these different things. And it was very impactful. And so in 1955, coming off that landmark decision of Brown versus Board, they were winning. And the world and the South saw that. And of course, the South decided to rise behind the banner of the White Citizens Council, which was created as an answer to Brown versus Board education. This is the atmosphere Emmett Till walked into. So when he walked into that southern door, the next biggest thing for the NAACP at that time was anti-lynching legislation. That's their bread and butter. That's how they made their money, their membership, through the deaths and lynchings of other Black men, women, or whoever, right? So coming off the heels of that landmark decision, Emmett Till happens. Mamie and Emmett becomes the perfect children, or poster children, to the anti-lynching fight. This is why the case had such an impact. because there was a lot, and I won't say really political motivation. It was political motivation because we were trying to get anti-legislature passed. Emmett Till's case at first was only considered to be a murder. When they changed that terminology to a lynching, it became larger than life. And that's why the movement happened. Mamie's decision, open casket funeral for the world to see what happened to her son. We heard about lynchings, many of them. There were many lynchings that happened in 1955, young kids as well, younger than Emmett. But what set this away from all the others was that open casket funeral where the world got a chance to see the victim for the first time, and it was a child. That's why we all can still identify with the Emmett Till case. He was 14 years old. We all remember being 14.
Two of the most significant leaders of the movement, before there was real movement, were killed just months before Emmett Till in Mississippi. That's key.
The Trinity Killings, which is considered, took place in bloody summer of 1955, was Reverend George Lee, who was shot and killed on his way home from a speaking engagement from Belzoni, Mississippi. He was trying to register black voters. He himself was the first registered black voter in Mississippi in 1955. 2 weeks prior to Emmett Till's arrival to Mississippi was the murder of Lamar Smith out of Brookhaven, Mississippi. He was shot on the courthouse lawn in broad daylight in front of about 100 people. Both these men were trying to register black voters. So when I hear people talk about those who lost their lives in the struggle, I think about Reverend George Lee and Lamar Smith. These cases I also investigated. But we gotta remember these two people and the sacrifices that were made. So this, again, was the atmosphere Emmett Till walked into. It was just fate that he made this wolf whistle. Now you gotta ask me the question, if the murder of Emmett Till, if it didn't take place, will we be at this place right now? Will we be right here in this moment? I have to tell you no. I really have to tell you that, because we really have to put history in context here. Off the heels of the murder of Emmett Till, 4 days before Rosa Parks decided not to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama, there was a huge Till rally that took place at Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. A young 26-year-old Dr. Martin Luther King, he wasn't a doctor at that time, but Martin Luther King was hosting the event. He felt that the murder of Emmett Till was an intimidation factor to keep black people away from the polls. 1955 was an election year. In the audience at the Till rally was Rosa Parks. 4 days later, she decides not to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So I can tell you right here, out of the murder of Emmett Till during the Black resistance movement, we come to know now to be the Civil Rights Movement. If it wasn't for the murder of Emmett Till, these two major milestones or acts of courage would have never taken place.
There would have been no bus boycott.
Would be no bus boycott. You wouldn't have had Rosa Parks making a decision. But you have to question, where would we be right now? Would the movement be as powerful? Would it have been as powerful as we know it? I don't believe so. And that's why it's so important to know the Till story. And that's why it's so important that we must get justice in this case. I heard when Carolyn Bryant came out, and I'm sorry to keep doing this, but when Carolyn Bryant came out and made her admission, she felt more sympathy for her family than Emmett Till's family. And it's one thing that we know Emmett Till's family was, of course, impacted. All their lives changed. Yes. But the murder of Emmett Till started one of the greatest migrations out of the South. So it's not just their family. I mean, everyone began to leave the South during this time. You know, my parents grew up afraid to tell me this story. You know, so many people have been inspired by this case. And so that's why I'm saying it's so important that this story continues to be told time and time again, but we need to have justice.
Yeah, I just, again, just want to thank you, and thank you for everybody for being
everyone.
here. This was...
Thank you so much.
I'm also just incredibly grateful to Cardinal Dolan and the Archdiocese for creating a space like this where we can have these conversations and we can have these opportunities to heal together. How can we follow you, Keith, and the progress of the work that you're doing?
Well, I'm on all social media platforms, so you can locate me there, and I'll give you updates on our upcoming feature film that I'm excited that we're moving forward with quickly. And but thank you, and thank the Sheen Center, and thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
For being my partner in crime. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming.